back door, and you can get back in that way. I think we're gonna leave it open, Tim, so that people can get in and out that way, just so that there's not a distraction for Eve in and out of this door, if that's okay, once we get going. We're just gonna live stream Eve's talk, and then when we have a question and answer period, we're gonna shut down the live streaming, so you don't have to worry about being on film or listened to. And sometimes it's easier to ask and answer questions if you're not being filmed. And so at this point, I'd like to introduce you to David Purley. David is the fairly recent appointed director of what today is called the Micmac Maliseet Institute, but we hope by Senate next week will be called the Micmac Wolastoqey Center. And that's the name that we think is the more appropriate description of what the center does. And we're delighted to have David here tonight to begin with a welcome. Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to group because this is the third session I'm attending today. So can I have your autograph? Waliwan, back here in Moda. Waliwan, back here in Wolastoqey. The much Ulida Haziljo, Tunaban, Bejiton, Bloodway Wagano, Cat the Wagano, Ulida Haz Wagano, Gulwan Gamach. Well, in this way, I call him so local in his local. I think I just wanted to welcome you in my language. It's so important for you to hear the original language of this territory, Wolastoqey territory. For your information, in New Brunswick, we have the Mi'kmaq, and their traditional territory is northern part of New Brunswick. And for the Wolastoqey, our traditional territory is here, the southern part of New Brunswick. And I just mentioned that I appreciate you being here to share your knowledge, your information, and your teachings. And hopefully we can use those teachings so we can reflect on it and work together and improve the situation of First Nations people here in New Brunswick. William, thank you. Thank you.
Hi folks, I'm Jose Domini, Research Coordinator here in the Faculty of Education at UNB, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Eve Tuck. This evening she will be presenting on Respect and Risk, Chasing the Benefits of Research in Indigenous Communities. Dr. Tuck is Unaga from St. Paul Island, all the way from Alaska. She's an Associate Professor of Educational Foundations and Coordinator of Native American Studies at the State University of New York at New Paltz. She's conducted participatory action research with New York City youth on the uses and abuses of the GED option, impacts of mayoral control, and school non-completion. Her current research is with migrant youth in New York's Hudson Valley. Her publications are concerned with the ethics of social science research and educational research, Indigenous social and political thought, decolonizing research methodologies and theories of change, and the consequences of neoliberal accountability policies on school completion. And I believe that some of your publications are available to share with us afterwards. So, perfect. So, welcome, and I'm looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you so much for being here. Is my volume okay? I want to begin by saying thank you for your greeting. Thank you for your welcome. It's been wonderful to spend the day on the land of the Wolastoqey people, excuse me. And I have also enjoyed being on neighboring land to Mi'kmaq people and have Really had a wonderful time with you today. This morning I met with PhD students and faculty here at UNB. In the afternoon, I met with First Nations educators and school leaders, and I just had a wonderful dinner, funny dinner with First Nations emerging scholars and researchers, and it's fantastic to be here with you. I want to say thank you to Anne Sherman, who has been a warm and welcoming host. And again, thank you, David Purley, for your welcome, but also your thoughtful questions earlier today about how we attend to our elders in our scholarship. My elders and my family are from St. Paul Island in the Bering Sea, which is quite far north of the Aleutian chain. We are a Nungan who have held meaningful relationships to our land and water for more than 10,000 years. So I respect the work of Wolastoqey people here to make meaning and relationships here on their land for now and for the next generations. I have a Prezi that I'm going to share with you today, and I've just made the Prezi public. So if you are watching from home or if you want to look at this later, I think probably the best way to find it would be just by Googling Eve Tuck Prezi, which is Prezi, and then you'll see this as one of the public Prezis that comes up. So if you want to follow along with what we're looking at here, you can do that. So in recent years, social scientists have been reconsidering the ethical imperatives of their work, not only in terms of risk to participants, but in terms of enacting a more whole sense of respect. I have, as you'll hear today, here this evening and heard from me earlier today, I have some lingering, I think I have to do this.
Okay.
That's because thousands of people just logged on to the Prezi. So, as I was saying, I have some lingering doubts about the project of social science research, and I'm going to talk to you tonight about some of those doubts and where they come from, and then where those doubts go, what we do with those doubts. But tonight, I also want us to attend more pointedly to the possible benefits of social science research and how we can make sure that those benefits come home to us. That is, even if we have to chase them down. Alongside many wonderful collaborators, I have been asking questions about whether research. Is research really the intervention that is needed? Is research going to make it better or worse? Is research going to do what we think it will do? If we needed to do something specific, is it still research? And do we really need research, or do we need organizing? I have also been asking questions about whither research. Why are these questions the ones that we need to ask in this place? What questions have we asked before, and how satisfying were the answers? What is the history of inquiries in this place? What research crimes have been done here, and what forms of knowing have been dismissed? What questions need to be asked here, even if they can't be answered through research? Tonight, in this talk, I'm going to bring you through some of the thinking that I've been doing about the purposes of research in Indigenous communities. Of course, curiosity, inquiry, science, philosophy, and theory making have been central activities of Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. Yet, with the advance of disciplinary knowledge and systematic inquiry in the academy, the purposes of research conducted on Indigenous peoples has been determined from the outside. Scholars have traced the histories of academic disciplines such as anthropology, psychology, bioethics and education, and their work on behalf of the false logics of emergent settler colonial nation states. Early anthropology sought to study the native, to confirm societal notions of the depravity of indigenous cultures and justify the theft of indigenous land. Early psychology was concerned with proving that the intellects of white people were superior to the intellects of Black people, indigenous people, and immigrants, some of those groups who are now considered to be white. When we look at the origin stories of many of academic disciplines, we see that they are entangled with the project of settler colonialism, justifying the theft of indigenous land and the demolition of indigenous life, and establishing racial hierarchies to justify the enslavement of Africans. My own work has sought to understand how educational research has been consumed by the practice of damage-centered research, in which researchers set about proving how individuals, tribes, schools, and communities have been impacted by deprivation, trauma, and loss. In this kind of research, there is a general belief that effectively documenting damage will convince those in power to give up power and resources and make needed change. I am concerned that such political and sovereign wins rarely come through, and that individuals and communities are pathologized and become singularly defined by their purported damage. These research frameworks operate within colonial theories of power and change. Taken together, these and related analyses concretize the ways in which social science is complicit with the logics of settler colonialism, promoting at times the projects of indigenous erasure, anti-Blackness, and white supremacy. The ethical standards of the academic industrial complex are a recent development, and they do not always do enough to ensure that social science research is deeply ethical, meaningful, or useful for the individual or community being researched. The emergence of discussions about ethics in social science research and the establishment of review boards to monitor ethical practices with human subjects were prompted by instances of outright abuse. Research ethics guidelines were created reactively, largely in response to public exposure to instances of outrageous abuse. Monique Gachard and I have argued that the proliferation of ethical regulations in the academic industrial complex are actually attempts by social scientists to reconcile their disciplines with their problematic origins. Said another way, though it is well documented that modern discussions of research ethics rose to prominence in response to instances of egregious abuse, interventions such as the establishment of ethical regulatory bodies did not address the ways in which social science theory and methods are complicit in projects of settler colonialism and white supremacy. They did not address how much of academic research was premised on the dehumanization of some populations to establish the superiority and betterment of others. Ethical regulatory bodies are reactive and partial rather than proactive and holistic. They represent a system of a priori checks without attempting to balance or disrupt asymmetrical power relationships in scientific inquiry. Ethical regulatory bodies treat the symptoms of abuse and not the causes. And I think that those causes are abidances to logics of settler colonialism, scientific racism, and white supremacy. I have worked with Kay Wayne Yang to point to the pervasive silence on the contemporary rationales for social science research. The reasons for doing research are rarely questioned. And it is generally assumed that doing research is inherently good or inherently beneficial. Social science researchers are trained to believe that research is useful, even if that use is quite vague, and that research can compel needed change. This is the hidden curriculum of social science, that the researched need change and that social science will compel that change. As such, when we see something that needs attention, resources, critique, or intercession, Our initial inclinations as researchers might be to conduct research on it. We generally do research to meet an unmet need. Yet there are far more instances in which research is not the most useful or appropriate intervention than are commonly realized. These include situations in which the researcher already has a clear sense of what she wants her research to say or do. The research is constructed to convince a group of people of something that they are completely closed to hearing. The research is meant to legitimize community knowledge that is already deeply recognized in that community. The researcher would like to say something that has already been said, but this time in the voices of youth, or community, or elders, or so on. So kind of ventriloquism. Or instances in which there is too much at stake for a research process to reveal findings that counter a researcher or a community's position on an issue. And this is where we have to balance questions of research with questions of sovereignty. In these instances, research is reduced to a performance of inquiry in order to acquire legitimacy. This is when research is the most cynical about inquiry and the most conceited about its own efficacy. In cases in which an intervention is needed, there are many other ways of developing and communicating ideas, including billboards, blogs, bumper stickers, letters, compelling spokespersons, flash mobs, YouTube videos, curricula, open houses, community talking tours, postcards, and many forms of art. We might do any of these things instead of research. If acknowledged at all, there are several goals of research in Indigenous communities that can be generalized. These goals take shape as raising Indigenous voices, consciousness raising, increasing visibility, making safe spaces, or other hopeful outcomes. Of course, such goals are common in part because funders have determined them to be fundable. But they are also common because they are all related, they're all cousins to each other, through a shared theory of change in which raising visibility about an issue or community leads to good and just things. A theory of change asks how what we do leads to good and just things. This is not to say that raising visibility does not lead to good and just things, but that it is profoundly important to think through how and why it leads to good and just things, and not just assume that it does. For example, are there other things that need to be in place for raising visibility to work? Might there be some instances in which visibility does not lead to desired change? The answers are, of course, but it is in the asking of the questions that matters. I'm interested in the pedagogical practice of asking about theories of change. Theories of change may be thought of as shorthand for the theories of change that we want, as the usage generally implies the conceptualizations or theorizations of how to get the changes that we desire. And again, I'm advocating for a pedagogical engagement with change, involving conversations and reflections about how change happens. According to the post-structuralist turn, change is always occurring, and within a more cynical critical approach, change is never happening, or if it does, it reinscribes relations of power. Within many Indigenous epistemologies, change is always happening, and this is in a different way than the post-structuralist frame. But it can take on lots of different forms, which are desirable or otherwise. These varying perspectives on change matter with regard to human agency, and thus matter with regard to resistance. Each perspective is going to have different implications. Each theory of change is going to have different implications for how humans should spend our time on this planet. If you subscribe to what Malcolm Gladwell and others have called the tipping point theory of change, Then, and that's when societal change is more likely to happen when a critical mass of people hold a new view or a new idea, and that's he likens to the spread of a virus. Then that person would spend time trying to convince as many people as possible of that new idea. And she would probably be better off spending time with those on the fence or in the middle, rather than arguing with people who really disagree with her. Because what is needed is the critical mass of people who agree, not an argument that would convince even those who are the most inconvincible. So she would spend her time in conversation with people who are likely to agree with her, and then those who are a little bit less likely, and then those who are a little bit less likely, until she can build a critical mass. And don't mess with the no people. Right? In this theory of change, there's little need to be in conversation with those who are most likely to disagree. You see, your theory of change is going to have implications for how you spend your time. In another example of a theory of change, Deleuze and Guattari write that it was a series of molecular rather than molar shifts. Those flows that flee, this is quoting them, flows or fleas that escape the binary organizations, the resonance apparatus, and the overcoding machine that prompted the May 1968 resistance in France. Such molecular flows are imperceptible, creating zigzag cracks, tiny trickles, leaks between segments which escape the centralization of molar segmentarity. Deleuze and Guattari's theory of change is dependent on molecular flows, those which escape and prevent the totalization of molar segmentarity. In such a framework, change appears as if from nowhere. Mapping it, perhaps, is only possible in hindsight. As Gabriel Tarde said about earlier resistances in France, what one needs to know is which peasants in which areas of the south of France stopped greeting the landowners. The molar and the molecular are simultaneous, so it is altogether likely that molecular flights and flows reinforce molar segmentarity. But there are other, wholly unpredictable flows that manage to escape, and in so doing manage to shift the whole plane of segmentarity. This is to say that molar change happens as a byproduct, not as a direct result of molecular human activity. And this is true at greater and smaller scales because it's a fractal theory. In this theory of change, change happens whether we take direct action or to affect it or not. And in fact, our direct actions to affect change might foreclose the change that we seek. So what is there for humans to do inside this theory of change except for to be human? There are innumerable other theories of change that we could not name here. And they are at work or not everywhere around us. Psychotherapy is a theory of change. Boycotts are a theory of change. Peace, revenge, anarchy, prayer, doing nothing. These are all theories of change. Not only will the theory of change inform the nature, the toward what of change, but also it will inform the for whom of change. Clearly, when we theorize the change that we want and how we get there, the we becomes very important to unpack, as the desires of different groups for change are going to be radically different. Whether it is the desires of the privileged or powerful to stay in power, the desires of the neoliberal machinery to expand the market, the desires of the dominated to be less violated within the nation-state arrangements, or return or renewal of life after, beyond, and despite the modern arrangements of nation-states. Theories attempt to answer the questions of change that are already territorialized and temporalized. Theories of change tend to be plural. The same actors often have multiple theories of change, appropriate for their multiple modes of engagement with colonial modernity. They operate exponentially, simultaneously, on different timelines and within different geopolitical frames. Theories of change try to ask and answer questions about the territory or the scale of change. How does change happen within my body, within this neighborhood, this school district, this city, this community or nation, this nation state, this system of nation states, or outside and or between all of those borders? Theories of change also try to ask and answer questions about the temporality of change. What kinds of immediate change are possible? How can the needed efforts to foment change be sustained? How do immediate changes connect to longer-term political transformation? Finally, there are questions we must ask of theories of change that help us to understand possibilities for trans-historical struggles that exceed even the current political processes, including struggles for Indigenous sovereignty, decolonization, and intergenerational repatriated life, Indigenous futurity, Black futurity, and the non-permanence of settler colonial nation states. For many years, theories of change involving research in Indigenous communities has sought to collect stories of pain and humiliation. Why do researchers collect pain narratives among Indigenous peoples? What is the theory of change at work there? Why does the academic industrial complex want stories about pain among Indigenous peoples? An initial and partial answer is because settler colonial ideology believes that, in fiction author Shel Jaffe's words, scars make your body more interesting. Jaffe's work of short fiction bearing that sentiment as a title captures the exquisite crossing of wounds and curiosity and pleasure. I don't think that it's possible for me to advocate for one theory of change over another. I care again about that pedagogical project of thinking about them together. But I am certainly critical of colonial theories of change in which individuals or communities collect evidence of their supposed brokenness or damage in order to convince somebody more powerful outside of their communities to give up resources. Such a theory of change is flawed for at least 3 reasons. It requires individuals and communities to depict themselves in a one-dimensional way as damaged. It locates power completely outside our communities, and it rarely actually works. Settler colonial ideology, constituted by its conscription of others, holds the wounded body as more engrossing than the body that is not wounded. Yet the person with the wounded body does not politically or materially benefit for being more engrossing. In settler colonial logic, pain is more compelling than privilege, scars more enthralling than the body unmarked by experience. In settler colonial ideology, pain is evidence of authenticity. Academe, formed and informed by settler colonial ideology, has developed the same palette for pain. Emerging and established social science researchers set out to document the problems faced by a community, and often in doing so, recirculate common tropes of dysfunction, abuse, and neglect. Indeed, much of what counts as voice and makes voice count is pain. I have tried to theorize desire-based research not as the antonym, but rather as the antidote for damage-based narratives. There is much pain that exists and persists in Indigenous communities. So I am not trying to say that we should ignore or conceal that pain. I am trying to point to the ways that pain narratives are always incomplete. They bemoan the food deserts, but forget to see the food innovations. They lament the concrete jungles and miss the roses and the tobacco from concrete. Desire-centered research does not deny the experience of tragedy, trauma, and pain, but positions the knowing derived from such experiences as wise. This is not about seeing the bright side of hard times, or even about believing that everything happens for a reason. Utilizing a desire-based framework is about working inside a more complex and dynamic understanding of what a person or a community comes to know in a lived life. Logics of pain focus on events, sometimes hiding structure, always adhering to a teleological trajectory of pain, brokenness, repair, or irreparability, from unbroken to broken, and then to unbroken again. Logics of pain require time to be organized as linear and rigid, in which the pained body is set back or delayed on some kind of path of humanization, and now must catch up, but never can, to the settler or unpained or able body. In this way, logics of pain have superseded the now outmoded racism of an explicit racial hierarchy with a more politically tolerable racism of a developmental hierarchy. Under a developmental hierarchy in which some were undeterred by pain and depression and others were waylaid by their victimry and subalternity, damage-centered research reifies a settler temporality and helps to suppress other understandings of time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we might chase the benefits of research for academic communities, but I want to summarize the doubts that I have identified so far. The first doubt is related to the origins of academic disciplines and the roles that academic disciplines continue to play in the maintenance of settler colonialism. The second doubt is concerned to the limitations of ethical regulations to address the roots of many of the abuses in social science, which are extensions of the settler colonial imperatives of social science. I am not at all convinced that social science is inherently good or beneficial, so I have doubts related to the role of research in our theories of change. And finally, I'm troubled by the preponderance of pain collection that has come to typify research in Indigenous communities. So to be clear, again, I'm not making an argument against the existence of pain or for the erasure of memory, experience, and the wisdom that comes with suffering. Rather, I want us to see that the collecting of narratives of pain by social scientists is already a double erasure, whereby pain is documented in order to be erased, often by eradicating the communities that are supposedly injured and supplanting them with more hopeful stories of progress into a better, whiter settler world. Desire interrupts this narrative of damaged communities and white settler progress. A 2011 special that aired in the United States called Hidden America, Children of the Plains, portrayed journalist Diane Sawyer literally riding a horse into Oglala Lakota territory to expose the profound poverty of Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. The special, of course, remains silent on the role of settler colonial nation states and corporations in producing the poverty in places like Pine Ridge, and sought explanations that would not implicate viewers or settlers or ABC or the federal government or anyone except for the people of Pine Ridge. Indian Country Today journalist Rob Schmidt described the special as little more than, quote, poverty porn. Diane Sawyer's essay and expose reflects the downside of liberal advances in representation and inclusion, as if to say, you may be seen but only as damaged. We may see you but only from the safety of our own homes. You are responsible for your own damage and I am responsible for my own success. The theory of change puts too much faith in the power of exposure and awareness and doesn't count for the complacency of voyeurism. Soon after the special, another analysis in Pine Ridge emerged when youth from the community created a video response to Sawyer's production, which they made available to the public on YouTube. The student video is a pointed refusal of Sawyer's narrative, telling her and the viewers, I know what you probably think of us, I saw the special too. Maybe you saw a picture or read an article, but we're here because we want you to know that we are more than that. We have so much more than poverty. So I have a video, and I'm going to take some time so that you can take a look.
I know you probably seen us. I saw the special too.
Maybe you saw a picture. I read an article.
But we're here because we want you. We're more than that.
We're more than that. We're more than that.
We're more than that. We're more than that.
We're more than that.
We have so much more than poverty.
In this response, the students did not offer more interviews, more expose, more data to disprove Sawyer's assertions. They showed themselves in classroom and hallways, on basketball courts, in libraries and chemistry labs. They used magic markers on their arms and hands to show words like pride, humor, intelligence, futures, futures, futures. The video made by Pine Ridge students is both a rejoinder and a refusal. It doesn't say, come back and get the story right. It doesn't offer a new object of study. It keeps the gaze. It keeps the objected children out of reach. Before engaging in research, communities must ask themselves 3 important questions. What is our theory of change? What role does research have in our theory of change? And what role, if any, might an academic researcher have in this research? For the rest of what I'll talk to you about tonight, I want to attend to the promises of research in Indigenous communities. And sometimes it happens that you name a talk before you've written the talk. And I used the word chasing in my title, and because I had this image of a chase scene in my head. And before coming to Fredericton, I posted a message on my Facebook wall and I said, what are some really great chase scenes from movies that I could show the audience so they are getting the idea of a chase in their minds? And my friends watch a lot of action films and they posted really great, interesting stuff. And some of my friends were saying, I'm really surprised that you are using a chase scene. Like, knowing you, I'm just surprised that that would be where you go in order to create a new image that we're thinking about for chasing. And I realized that when you look at chase scenes in films, usually you're supposed to root for the person who's being chased, not the chaser. So I in the Prezi, I do have a secret little, what are those called? Easter eggs. I have a secret Easter egg that has some of the chase scenes that my friends recommended to me. And I will show you very quickly one that's more in the spirit of things that I'm trying to talk about, in which you root for the chaser, not just for the chase. Also, the theme music in a chase scene is extremely important. So as you're thinking about chasing, as an Indigenous person, a First Nations person, about chasing down the benefits of research, I want you to have great theme music in your mind as you're chasing it down. Big leaps and bounds, surprising crisscrosses. Shadowy alleyways that don't quite go where you think they'll go. Lots of false paths, missteps. So you get what I mean when I use the word chase. So for me, the promises of research in Indigenous communities have to be linked to the uses of research in Indigenous communities. And that seems like an obvious thing to say, but you wouldn't think that it's obvious with some of the ideas that people might bring to you. So Indigenous research methods, we're going to talk about those because they're in the plural, because they're numerous and diverse. Social science differentiates between methods which involve human subjects or do not. But it's important to remember that blood samples, bones, school records, and other documents ordinarily considered not to involve human subjects still once belonged to somebody who was loved and important to others. Indigenous research methodologies emerge from Indigenous epistemologies or knowledge frameworks, so that they are always people and place specific. The same Indigenous research methods may be used across many different contexts, but they will always need to be tailored to the context to match community needs and understandings of knowing and knowledge. Numerous Indigenous scholars have described the distinct aims of Indigenous and decolonizing research. Some of those are to remember the true purpose of knowledge in and for our communities, to uncover the quiet thoughts and beliefs of a community, to map the variety of ideas in a community, to confirm that Indigenous traditions are the repository of vast experience and deep insight on achieving balance and harmony, to make generational knowledge of elders, youth, parents, warriors, hunters, leaders, gardeners, fishers, teachers, and others available to other generations. To use Indigenous languages to express ideas and to bring new language to new and recovered ideas. To honor all of our relations by engaging in the flow of knowledge and community. To reflect the cosmology of our communities. And to engage in place and land in ways that dramatically differ from more colonial constructions of place and land. One of the most distinguishing features of Indigenous research methodologies is that they are based on the concept of what Sean Wilson calls relational accountability or relational validity. In other words, what is most important and meaningful, and this is Sean Wilson, is fulfilling a role and obligations in the research relationship. That is, being accountable to your relations. Creating and maintaining respectful and mutually beneficial relationships between researchers and Indigenous communities, even when that researcher comes from the community, is of utmost importance, in part because Indigenous peoples have been mistreated and misled by academic researchers, both in the distant and recent past. To ensure relational validity, Wilson recommends that researchers ask themselves the following questions. How do my methods help to build respectful relationships between the topic that I'm studying and myself as a researcher? How do my methods help to build respectful relationships between myself and other research participants? How can I relate respectfully to the other participants involved in this research so that together we can form a stronger relationship with the idea that we will share? What is my role as researcher in this relationship, and what are my responsibilities? Am I responsible in fulfilling my role and obligations to the other participants, to the topic, and all my relations? What am I contributing or giving back to the relationship? Is the sharing, growth, and learning that is taking place reciprocal? I always think when I'm considering these questions of Linda Tuhiwai-Smith's set of questions, which is, whose research is it? Who owns it? Whose interests does it serve? Who will benefit from it? Who has designed its questions and framed its scope? Who will carry it out? Who will write it up? How will its results be disseminated? And she talks about these as being core questions of any social science project. But then she says that there are additional set of questions that come into play when you're doing work in Indigenous communities. And she says these questions are simply part of a larger set of judgments on criteria that a researcher cannot prepare for, such as, is her spirit clear? Does he have a good heart? What other baggage are they carrying? Are they useful to us? Can they fix up our generator? Can they actually do anything? And it's these last two questions. Can they fix up our generator? Can they actually do anything? That has informed my ideas of chasing down the benefits. So I had a really good friend come and visit me last weekend. Her name is Melanie Shung. She's a Maori neuroscientist. And one of the things that she says that she, when she talks to other biomedical researchers and they are saying, how do I engage with First Nations? How do I engage with Indigenous communities? What she tells them is, don't think about the samples, think about the relationships. So if you think about your work as just about getting the samples, getting your data, extracting your data from a resource, like as if it's coal from a mine, then that is always going to be a problematic research relationship. So Melanie talks about the importance of thinking about relationships and having the initial and lasting goal be about building meaningful relationships. If we want to think about the long view benefits of research, if we want to think about what research can do in order for it to be meaningful for communities, these are just a couple of things that I thought of. I'm sure that you can add to them, but these are projects that are compatible with the larger project of Indigenous studies, and also very compatible with some of the most recent and exciting theories of decolonization. So if you are thinking that you want to conduct research that has is useful toward a project of decolonization, that you might think about research that can be constructed so that it supports and sustains Indigenous sovereignty. Research that supports and sustains Indigenous claims to land and maintains those claims to land. Supports, those are tongue twisters. Supports and sustains access to meaningful education, and research that supports and sustains community and individual well-being. Communities, Indigenous communities, need to not be satisfied with imprecise or strained links to these goals. For too long, we have accepted willy-nilly, kind of halfway, pipe dream versions of adherence to these goals. And we can't do it anymore because that work is in the way. Researchers who are trying to woo Indigenous communities, whether they are from that community or not, needs to come at that community with a theory of change that convinces and inspires. I mean that. In terms of immediate benefits, we can think of collaborators. So these are researchers who have ties to the academy. To think of these collaborators as connectors. How can you use yourself as a connector? Connect people in that in Indigenous communities to resources, to other institutions, to information, and to other communities. So one immediate benefit is to think of yourself as a connector. My same friend Melanie Shung talked about the idea of that in biomedical research, lots of times the researchers will establish a health clinic. And so one of the immediate benefits is that community residents are able to access specialists in different health conditions that they may not otherwise be able to do because they're too remote or whatever. But it's hard to think of a parallel for that in social sciences. So I was trying to think, what immediate skills the social, I mean, it's like, what have you done for me lately? It's always the Janet Jackson question. The question of what useful skills can you bring? And a lot of us have academic skills that we can bring. I'm going to work with you to write your college application letter. I'm going to work with you to get ready for your to take your GED exam. I'm going to work with you in order to think about what you're going to do next and help you to navigate this other. So we're strong readers and writers, and we can use those skills in order to help people meet their goals. And then again, to think about what Dr. Smith calls fixing the generator. So sometimes that means, figuring out how to unlock the iPhone, or sometimes it's trying to figure out how to get new tires put on when money is running low. Or I know, sometimes it's about getting the washing machine fixed. My colleague Wayne Yang and I have written quite a lot about contingent collaborations, and in this way we're questioning the longer project, the fantasies of solidarity, and thinking about what we can at most hope for is just some contingent collaborations, because we don't know where the future is going to take us. We don't know if at some time our goals will be oppositional goals. But in contingent collaborations, benefits are exchanged back and forth. They're not front-loaded or back-loaded. So you're not promising all the benefits at the end of the research. You're not saying, I'll give you this now and we'll figure it out figure out the rest of it later, but it's a constant exchange. Okay? There's really exciting work happening with regard to tribal IRBs and MOUs, Memoranda of Understandings, which include agreements about what can be made into data. So you're going to be here, going to spend time with us, and you're going to see a lot of stuff, but only this can be turned into data. I've done work with a community organization lately in which we made a ceremony in order to take stories and narratives that they have been collecting for years and turn those stories and narratives into data in a way that was in right relationship. The contingent collaboration is always also going to require us to have plans for sharing findings that include materials in home languages, social media articles, right? So all those easy click and shareables. If we are we're working with First Nations communities, we want to have those kind of social media articles, brief recaps of what has been found so that people can share it with one another quite easily without it being so burdensome. Community presentations and performances of the data. Michelle Fine and Maddie Phillips and Maria Torre have done some really exciting work around this in New York City about public performances of data that come from participatory action research. If you're not willing to do this, then I want to ask you again, why research? Why is that how you're spending your time? Of all the possible responses to all the phenomena in the world, why research? If there is not enough time or resources or energy or motivation or mutual regard or answerability to ensure that the benefits come home, then why are you doing research? There are so many papers, so many studies, so many academics, and so many careers. Research is a set of skills that can be useful, and the questions that are answered should be answered because they matter. I want to take you to one last slide about chasing the benefits. And these are the questions that I will leave you with tonight before we shift in our seats a bit and have a Q&A. But these are my questions for you, my lasting questions. What are the pressure points in research? Where are we able to make sure that we are keeping each other, as Lee Patel calls it, answerable? She's pushing against that discourse of accountability and saying, how can we be answerable to one another? What research questions, if any, will help us to answer our most aching questions? Who will be our contingent collaborators? And do we need research or do we need organizing? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eve. We do have time for a couple of questions. We're going to turn the live streaming off.